What's up, welcome back to Nowstalgia. Dave here with a review of Michael, the new music biopic film about the life of Michael Jackson, directed by Antoine Fuqua. This film has been a long time coming. There's a lot to get into with this movie. I'm going to talk about what works, what doesn't work, the box office potential of the movie, the state of music biopic films in general. We have a lot to get into here. But just to table set for a second, this movie's been a long time coming, to say the least. This film was originally dated for April of last year, then October of last year, now coming out in April 2026. There was very consequential reshoots for the film's third act that we'll get into in a bit. But the film is finally here from Lionsgate, and Antoine Fuqua, he did make Training Day, but for the most part, he's more of a steady hand type of director at this point. However, that does make some sense when you consider that the Michael Jackson estate was heavily involved in the creation of this movie, both creatively and financially. And given the recent tidal wave of music biopic films we've gotten, both big and small, it was only a matter of time before they attempted to tackle the Michael Jackson story. If you're going into Antoine Fuqua's Michael Jackson biopic film Michael expecting faithful recreations of some of the biggest moments of MJ's career, such as the Thriller music video, the Billie Jean performance at Motown 25, you will be satisfied. Jaafar Jackson, Michael's nephew, really nails it in the lead role here. He has the moves down. When this movie is singing, he is a big part of why it's working. However, if you are watching this movie expecting any kind of storytelling or creative depth, you will be sorely disappointed. And no, I'm not talking about any of the controversies regarding Michael Jackson's life and career. This movie attempts to tackle 25 years of Michael Jackson's life, and in the process, this is a sanitized, surface-level take at every turn. The movie nods at so many interesting angles, and if it only picked one of them, it would just be a much stronger movie. Michael Jackson the celebrity, Michael Jackson the creative, the musician, the family man. When trying to tell the story of one of, if not the most consequential figure in pop culture history, you should have higher standards than what this movie gives you. Given how rich this story was, the movie just glides above it. And unfortunately, it feels like it'll be defended by Michael's most longtime fans on principle, but in reality, whether you're a big fan or big detractor of Michael Jackson, everyone should expect more from their music biopic films than what something like Michael gives you. So yeah, I was let down, and I'm let down more than I would be by the average disappointing music biopic film, because there's just so much there when it comes to the Michael Jackson story, especially, this period, which is taking us through the late 60s to the late 80s. I mean, this is truly becomes the most fertile period of Michael Jackson's fame and career and persona. Maybe the persona stuff takes a future life of its own later on, of course, but we're talking about the 80s, right? We're talking about Off the Wall and Thriller and Bad at the very end here. There are so many eras and micro eras within this career that a more interesting movie would have been concerned with at least diving a little bit into. The movie's starting with Michael Jackson's life at the very beginning and giving us so much of the Jackson 5 and so much of young Michael Jackson, child Michael Jackson in the Jackson 5. Just feels unnecessary, frankly, to tell this story, given how much of the story the movie's attempting to tell. I don't know why we couldn't have picked this movie up when Michael Jackson was already a young man. And we're talking about Michael Jackson. I think maybe some people, maybe younger people, might not truly realize the gravity to which he existed as a pop culture figure in the 20th century. I mean, we're talking about Thriller, the best-selling album of all time. And again, we're talking about when people actually bought albums. In terms of total album sales, it's the Beatles, Michael Jackson, and Elvis, depending on, which numbers you're really referring to here. Truly an absolute paragon of global cultural fame. There's just so much interesting things to dive into with that. And that's before you even factor in Michael Jackson as the person, right? And how quirky and atypical he was just as a person, and the very unique life that he did live, especially in these early years. So the decision to give us so much of the early family stuff, which is told in a really straightforward fashion, it's just disappointing because it's taking time away. This movie is a little over 2 hours long. There evidently was a 3.5-hour cut. The movie has a really distinct ending place, literally gives you a His Story Continues MCU-esque stinger title card at the end there, all but alluding to another Michael Jackson movie to come in the future. has not officially been greenlit. Nothing's been made, but they've certainly already filmed plenty of stuff, and there's so much more that they could dive into. I wish they could have just got on with it a little bit more. I mean, the movie is very overtly characterizing the family in a certain way, where you have, of course, the remaining Jackson 5 brothers of Michael, who are all non-entities in this movie, basically not characters, don't have any real personality or moments, very few lines in general. They're not really part of the movie, but the Jackson 5 stuff is there. Everything is really, hampered on Michael Jackson's father, Joe Jackson, and the fact that he was a very abusive dad and domineering presence. He's painted as the clear villain of the story, and I have no qualms with that. By all means, that is, from everyone's understanding, very accurate, but the movie really only uses that as any source of conflict, and Michael's inability to communicate and get out from the thumb of his dad, taking the entire movie to progress, is just disappointing, because in the process we're just lacking so many, frankly, more interesting things we could have tackled. How Michael Jackson came up with Beat It, how they created and crafted the Thriller album. We're subjected to just musical montages of Michael Jackson staring at Post-it notes on a wall and watching A Werewolf in London and finding inspiration. Michael Jackson was a really specific creative person and musician as well. Quincy Jones is in this movie, particularly in the beginning. Of course, Quincy Jones, right? One of the greatest music producers of all time, involved in the 3 biggest Michael Jackson albums, right? A titanic music figure in his own right. He's relegated to just a dozen lines in this movie because the creative process is not part of this storytelling at all. And because the Michael Jackson estate was involved in this movie, you do get to hear the Michael Jackson music. If that was not the case, you wouldn't get the music, and it's hard to make a movie like this without the music. You can maybe do it with a documentary. That's happened in the past with other subjects, but for a music biopic film, you kind of need the songs. So you understand acquiescing to the whims of the Jackson estate, but frankly, I wish the Jackson estate wanted to do little bit more of a risk, right? I mean, in the process, what we're getting is the Bohemian Rhapsody playbook, right? Bohemian Rhapsody, massive movie, $900 million worldwide at the box office, Oscar nominations, Rami Malek wins Best Actor, right? By all means, a big success. And that movie does lack in some depth. I think the critical reevaluation of that movie has trended downward after pretty positive reception in the beginning. But that movie also gives you the Queen Live Aid performance at Wembley Stadium in full, basically. And those kind of moments of like karaoke reproduction of quintessential music moments that just connect with millions of people across the globe, that still is movie magic type stuff when you see it. And when you watch this movie and you watch Michael Jackson working through the set of the Thriller music video, right? It still is really great to watch. Hearing Beat It, seeing the Billie Jean Motown 25 performance. Those are amazing moments in this movie still. Frankly, I think they could have been a little bit better, particularly the Billie Jean sequence. Antoine Fuqua, and I don't know who the DP was, but they cut a lot to the crowd, living it up, clapping and moving and really responding to that performance of Billie Jean. And it, leads you up to, of course, the iconic moonwalk from that performance. I believe it's the first time we see a moonwalk in the movie. I do think that one could have been staged just a little bit better. There's just a lot of cutting, but still, those moments really rock. But for me, I would have liked even more into the creativity, right? The Thriller music video pioneered the art form of making music videos. And the movie, there's a passing line or two about MJ wanting to make his short films, as he puts it. And again, that's a whole tangent you could have went down because it's interesting. But this movie has no desire to do anything but show you stuff and show you as it was and not inspect anything. And throughout the movie, we see his positive relationship with his mother, who's played by Nia Long. I think Coleman Domingo as Joe Jackson certainly has a lot more to do. Coleman Domingo, pretty unrecognizable in the prosthetics, but I think they did a pretty good job to make him look like Joe Jackson. He definitely has a villainous energy to him. Coleman Domingo obviously has such a gravelly yet soothing and velvety voice. You know, he can be domineering. Like he did a really nice job with what he was given. Nia Long has a lot less to do, frankly. Just kind of being like the shoulder for Michael to lean his head on and talk to, and kind of be the foil to Joseph. You know, there's not much there, but Michael as the person who can't quite get away from his father, like it's hard material in this movie because, and I'm not positive how accurate this was. I assume it was pretty accurate, but Michael's just basically unable to communicate with his domineering dad, and he can't get away from him for years and years, despite having all these solo ambitions. It takes a long time. It's just really frustrating storytelling because it just strings along at such a glacial pace. And even if in reality it took all those years to actually happen, where Michael's able to finally break free and finally stop performing with his brother, stop performing as the Jacksons, right? I would have liked a little bit more build-up and development of that as a ongoing plot point within the movie. You know, and the movie makes a really kind of overt and repetitive point of showing young Michael as someone who, you know, went to seek sick kids at the hospital and seemed to connect with those kids. And on the reverse side of that, he would go to the toy store and buy toys for himself and got all these elaborate and exotic pets at home and things like that. And his inability to connect with people his own age and his kind of maturity or lack thereof as he became a young man, but still was a really young soul. Obviously, there's so much to get into with that, and maybe the estate didn't want to tackle that too much beyond showing it to you. But again, that's another interesting angle about what made him such a unique person. And of course, the celebrity factor, we see him being mobbed by fans. We see fans fainting in the crowd during the concert performances. We understand that he can't go anywhere because there's 100 people outside of the family estate at all times. That's all there, but that's all they speak on it. There's, again, no actual examination in the fact that he was the most famous person on the planet at that time. I did really enjoy the Bloods and Crips scene, in the lead up to the Thriller music video, watching that moment of Michael Jackson creative directing and working through in real time these dance moves. Moments like that really hit a music biopic film. It's like when you're watching Queen figure out the guitar riff to Another One Bites the Dust in real time in the studio in Bohemian Rhapsody. A lot of music biopic films do stuff like this. But watching something like that, where you're seeing this, these iconic dance moves and things like that, I just would have liked a little bit more. Frankly, Billie Jean, the most popular song of Michael Jackson's career, arguably the greatest synth line ever from Quincy Jones and friends who composed the song. I would have liked the creation of that to have factored in a little bit. Again, I think the Thriller stuff is surprisingly glossed over more than I would have expected. And of course, that leads us to the controversy with Michael Jackson's life and at the time, and of course, all the way up into the present day. This movie was extensively reshot because due to a basically creative oversight, they did not realize that there were aspects of Michael Jackson's life where he was accused. I don't know if it was exactly the first accuser, but one of the first accusers, part of the settlement with that person involved in not being able to be dramatically portrayed on screen. And I guess that happened to be overlooked, and they had to reshoot the third act of this movie in the process to get around that. That helped contribute to this movie being delayed, a year. But it's worth noting that because the film was going to bring up such accusations. It was not going to ignore them entirely, but it was seemingly forced into ignoring them, at least in this first movie, due to that unforeseen legal, standing that already existed. So I'm expecting them to make another movie. I'd be curious how long it takes. This movie is dramatically and surprisingly very expensive. The reshoots apparently only added $15 million, but the total budget's $200 somehow. And yes, there's some special effects, like the stadium concert scenes stand out in that respect. But how this movie costs so much is pretty confusing. I expect it to be successful. I'm curious to what degree the box office does. In comparison to Bohemian Rhapsody, which came out several years ago, and since then, there's been music biopic films that have not been nearly successful, right? They're truly a mixed bag as a genre. I think of Rocket Man, which came out a year later, which I liked quite a bit. That's my favorite of the recent music biopic films. That's a movie that was not afraid to show the warts and the faults of Elton John, far from it, and actually had a kind of virtuosic and dreamlike way to tell its story. It was not super down the middle, like Rocket Man. But you think about like Back to Black, the Amy Winehouse movie with Marisa Bella. I Want to Dance with Somebody, the Whitney Houston one with Naomi Ackie. Those movies both came and went, and having a big fan base to this day that's persisted is not enough depending on the situation. That being said, the Michael Jackson fan base is second to none, seemingly. So I expect this movie to effectively be critic proof and perform really well. I don't know what the true ceiling is. I was initially expecting this to be $1 billion movie. But the domestic tracking here in the States is, strong, like 70 million. But like, how will this leg out? It's coming out just on the cusp of summer. Big movies are on the way. Be really curious how this movie legs and performs. We know it'll be big overseas because Michael Jackson is such an international presence and fandom. But when you think about when I watch this movie, and I'm so let down by its lack of interest in telling any kind of true story. I get all bummed out all over again about the Ezra Edelman Prince documentary series that was shelved by the Prince estate. Of course, Ezra Edelman, one of our great documentarians, made OJ Made in America 10 years ago at this point, which was widely seen as one of the greatest docs ever, and he made a Prince doc that unfortunately got into too much of the negative aspects of Prince's life, so much so that the Prince estate has shelved the project. And we're just in a time now where music biopic films have to acquiesce to the whims of the state if they want to use the music, in most cases, depending on who holds the music rights. And documentary films are kind of the same way. We're in the era of the autobiography, not the biography. People want to tell their own story. In the process, they don't tell a story. We're just unfortunately in a different time. We're in the era of the sports podcaster, the athlete podcast. We're in the era of the autobiography. We're in the era of the everyone has a doc, but no one cares to watch any of them at this point era. And obviously this was a big movie from Lionsgate, not inherently that exciting usually, but this has a big marketing push. People have been anticipating something like this for a long time. This is not any old doc, the Michael movie, but it's coming out in a time, and it's a great example of just the diminished state of this as a form. Looking ahead, before we get another Michael film, in all likelihood, we will be getting the quartet of Sam Mendes Beatles movies, which we know are in production at the moment. Of course, 4 Beatles movies, one focused apparently around each of the 4 members. We already know who that cast is for those series of movies. It's very stacked. Exciting. We'll see how that pans out. We'll see what kind of ambition that those series of films have. One other note I have about how this Michael movie ends is it kind of rips into the right from the Victory Tour, the end of the Victory Tour, where Michael finally breaks from the family and with a public announcement. And then it cuts, jumps ahead and cuts to Michael about to perform Bad. And, you see the pony, the long hair with the ponytail and the black outfit, the iconic stuff you recognize from the album cover. And, you hear the groove of the song playing before the lyrics, and you see Jaafar Jackson pull back and look at the camera from the tunnel, before he's about to run out. I thought that would have been an amazing place for the movie to end, but instead he actually runs out and does the song, and then the movie ends. And I thought that was kind of a bit strange, a bit almost like anticlimactic. I think it would have made more sense. They really wanted to show that sequence. How did that kick off the new movie? Frankly, I think that actually would have been a really nice ending moment for like, hey, we're making another one. Cut. But no, they kind of did a back-to-back performance scene, and it just felt a little jarring to me, frankly. So yeah, incredibly disappointed. Jaafar Jackson, though, hats off to him. I think he really did as best as he possibly could. Again, everything physical, dancing, performance, even the voice, the speaking voice. I think he did a really nice job. He certainly has nothing to do with the issues with the film. But let me know, where you at with Michael? I'm sure the big Michael Jackson fans will have plenty of retorts to my thoughts, but if you're a fan of movies, you're a fan of Michael Jackson, you're a detractor of Michael Jackson, you don't want to separate the art from the artist, you don't want to see this movie at all. Wherever you sit with it, let me know where you're at with the movie. And for more movie reviews, subscribe. I'll see you next time.